You ever notice how people panic the moment they sense you're not like them? They flock together for comfort, desperate for a crowd, mistaking noise for connection. But you're different. You learned early on that solitude isn't a prison, it's an armory. While most waste their time chasing approval like stray dogs chasing headlights, you find power in silence. You figured out the rules no one wants to talk about. It's not the loud voice in the room that's truly calling the shots. It's the one who builds in the shadows, who moves with intention, who needs no spotlight to dominate the field. Let's get real. I'm not here to give you sugar or offer band-aids for your wounds. You've spent years surrounded by people who see your calm and call it emptiness. They watch your distance and name it arrogance. But you know better. Solitude never broke you. Instead, it sharpened you. You know how it feels to walk alone through crises, to choose independence even when everything tries to chain you up. Maybe it started at home, maybe in school. Maybe you just woke up one day and realized all this noise, all this rush for validation isn't for you. You wanted sovereignty. You wanted clarity. You wanted to be unreadable. Here's a little scene. The office is buzzing. Phones are ringing. People are volleying opinions back and forth like tennis balls. You're there, watchful, silent. They wonder if you're distracted, unmotivated, cold. They don't have a clue. While they burn energy for every bit of attention, you're collecting fragments, reading patterns, piecing together the strategy behind every move. You're not just surviving. The lobo solitario adapts, thrives, and when pressed, controls the rhythm of the room. Let me hit you with a question. When was the last time you felt seen for who you are, not just for the mask you wear in public? When did someone truly recognize the discipline it takes to walk alone, the mental stamina to sustain your own clarity? Or do you still catch yourself thinking, is there something wrong with me for choosing isolation over cheap company? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Don't hold back. This isn't the place for pretense. Look, I need to break something down for you. The world has this backwards idea that being alone equals being broken. They see solitude as the consolation prize for people who couldn't make it in the social game. But here's what they're missing, what they refuse to acknowledge. Solitude isn't where weak men go to hide. It's where strong men go to forge themselves into something unbreakable. Most guys spend their entire lives running from silence because silence forces them to confront who they really are. They fill every moment with noise, with distractions, with other people's opinions echoing in their heads. They're terrified of the space between thoughts, scared of what they might discover if they actually listen to themselves for 5 minutes. But you learned to sit in that silence. You learned to breathe in that emptiness until it became your strength. The thing is, society needs you dependent. It needs you seeking validation, chasing approval, scrambling for acceptance. Because a man who doesn't need anyone's permission to exist, that's a problem for a system built on control. When you stop needing their applause, their recognition, their constant feedback loop of social media likes and workplace politics, when you become genuinely self-sufficient in your thinking and decision-making, you become impossible to manipulate, and that terrifies them. Viktor Frankl understood this when he was stripped of everything in the concentration camps. He discovered that the one thing no one could take from him was his inner freedom, his ability to choose his response to any situation. That mental sovereignty you've been building in your solitude? It's the same principle. While others hand over their emotional remote control to whoever's loudest, you keep yours locked away. Now let me bring in two voices that'll back this up. First, there's Seneca, the Roman Stoic who knew something about operating under pressure. He wrote, "All cruelty springs from weakness." The man understood that those who try to break you down, who mock your independence, who can't stand your self-sufficiency, they're revealing their own fragility. They attack what they can't comprehend because your autonomy reminds them of their own dependence. Then you've got more recent research from psychologists like Dr. Sherry Turkle at MIT, who's been studying solitude for decades. Her work shows that people who can handle being alone develop stronger decision-making capabilities, better emotional regulation, and what she calls self-intimacy, the ability to know yourself deeply enough to trust your own judgment. Meanwhile, those who can't tolerate solitude become slaves to external validation, constantly seeking others to tell them who they are and what they should think. But here's where it gets interesting. Turkle found that true solitude, the kind that builds strength, isn't about cutting yourself off from the world permanently. It's about having the capacity to be alone with your thoughts, to sit with discomfort, to process experiences without needing someone else to interpret them for you. It's about developing what she calls the capacity for solitude, which becomes a source of resilience and creative thinking. This connects directly to what you've experienced. Every time you chose to step back, instead of getting pulled into drama, every time you decided to think things through rather than react immediately, every time you trusted your own assessment over the crowd's opinion, you were building that capacity. You were developing the kind of mental discipline that most people will never have because they're too afraid of their own company. Now, let me hit you with 3 uncomfortable realities about this path you're on. The first one's going to sting, but you need to hear it. First reality. Your independence makes you a target. When people see someone who doesn't need their approval, who doesn't chase their acceptance, who can make decisions without consulting the group, it threatens their entire worldview. They've built their identity around being needed, around being part of the crowd, around the safety of consensus. Your ability to stand alone exposes the weakness in their foundation. So they'll try to bring you back into the fold. They'll call you antisocial, weird, cold, arrogant. They'll question your mental health, suggest you need help, imply that something's wrong with you for not craving what they crave. But here's the consequence they won't tell you about. The more independent you become, the more they'll try to test that independence. They'll create situations where they expect you to break, to come running back for support, to prove you still need them. And when you don't, when you handle your problems quietly, solve your own issues, keep moving forward without their input, that's when the real resentment starts. They realize you've found something they're too scared to look for, the ability to be complete without them. The impact is profound. You'll lose people. Friends who only knew how to relate to you when you needed something from them will drift away. Family members who used your dependence to feel important will start treating you like a stranger. Coworkers who counted on your participation in their drama will find someone else to play their games with. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. You're not losing connections. You're revealing which connections were real in the first place. Second reality. Solitude will show you truths about yourself that you can't unsee. When you remove all the external noise, all the other voices telling you who you should be, you're left face to face with your authentic self. And sometimes, that person isn't who you thought you were. You'll discover fears you've been avoiding, strengths you didn't know you had, patterns of thinking that have been running your life from the shadows. This isn't always comfortable. Most people prefer the illusion of self-knowledge to the discipline of actual self-examination. In the quiet, you'll start noticing how much of your behavior was performance, how many of your opinions were borrowed, how much of your identity was constructed to please other people. You'll catch yourself in moments of complete honesty and realize how rare those moments used to be. This level of self-awareness creates a responsibility most people don't want. Once you see clearly, you can't pretend to be blind anymore. The consequence is that you become accountable to a higher standard, your own. You can't blame your moods on other people anymore. You can't justify your decisions based on what everyone else is doing. You can't hide behind the crowd when things go wrong. This radical self-ownership is liberating, but it's also isolating in a different way. You realize how many people are walking around half asleep, reacting instead of responding, following scripts instead of making conscious choices. Third reality. Your calm will be mistaken for emptiness, but it's actually depth. When you stop reacting to every stimulus, when you choose your battles, when you respond instead of simply reacting, people who live in constant emotional chaos won't understand what they're seeing. They'll interpret your steadiness as indifference, your thoughtfulness as coldness, your boundaries as rejection. They're used to drama signaling care, noise indicating engagement, immediate reactions proving involvement. But what you've developed is something far more sophisticated. You've learned to separate your response from your emotions. You feel everything, probably more deeply than most, but you don't let those feelings hijack your decision-making process. You've created space between stimulus and response, which is where wisdom lives. This isn't emotional suppression, it's emotional intelligence. You're not dead inside. You're disciplined inside. The consequence is that people will constantly try to provoke reactions from you. They'll push buttons that used to work, expecting the old responses. When you don't give them what they're looking for, when you remain calm in situations that used to trigger you, when you think before you speak, when you choose not to engage in pointless arguments, they'll escalate their efforts. Some will respect this change and back off. Others will see it as a challenge and try harder to crack your composure. The long-term impact is that you become unreadable to people who depend on reading others for their sense of control. Your emotional stability becomes a form of power because it can't be leveraged against you. When someone can't manipulate your feelings, they lose their primary tool for influence. This makes you simultaneously more respected and more resented, depending on the person's relationship to control and manipulation. Let me paint you a picture of what happens if you don't embrace this path. If you keep fighting against your nature, keep trying to fit into spaces that were never built for you. Because I've watched too many men waste decades trying to be something they're not, and the price is always higher than they think it's going to be. First, you'll start compromising your judgment to keep the peace. It begins small, going along with plans you don't agree with, laughing at jokes that aren't funny, nodding when people say things you know are wrong. You tell yourself it's just being diplomatic, being a team player, being socially intelligent. But what you're really doing is training yourself to distrust your own instincts. Every time you ignore that voice in your head that says, "This doesn't feel right," you make it a little quieter. Every time you choose the group's comfort over your own clarity, you chip away at your ability to think independently. Before you know it, you're second-guessing decisions you used to make with confidence. You're looking around the room for approval before you speak. You're checking other people's faces to see if you're having the right reaction. You've handed over your internal compass to a committee, and committees don't navigate, they drift. You end up living someone else's life while wondering why nothing feels authentic anymore. Then comes the exhaustion. Maintaining a full self is like carrying a weight that gets heavier every day. You wake up tired because even your sleep is filled with anxiety about tomorrow's performance. You dread social situations that used to energize you because now they feel like tests you might fail. Simple conversations become complex calculations. What do they want to hear? What's the safe response? What version of myself should I present? This kind of constant self-monitoring drains your cognitive resources. While others are thinking about solutions, you're thinking about appearances. While they're focused on the problem, you're focused on how your response to the problem will be received. You lose the mental bandwidth for creativity, for deep thinking, for the kind of insight that comes from authentic engagement with ideas. You become reactive instead of proactive, defensive instead of strategic. Eventually, you'll find yourself surrounded by people who don't really know you. And the loneliness in that crowd will be worse than any solitude you've ever experienced. Because at least when you're alone, you can be honest. At least in solitude, you don't have to pretend your thoughts are different than they are. Your feelings are more palatable than they really are. Your standards are more flexible than they should be. But here's what you can do instead. Here's how you transform solitude from something that happens to you into something you use as a weapon for clarity, for strength, for unshakable confidence. First, learn to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it. Most people experience an uncomfortable emotion and immediately reach for a distraction. Their phone, food, another person, anything to avoid feeling what they're feeling. But discomfort is information. Anxiety might be telling you that you're not prepared for something important. Sadness might be processing a loss you haven't fully acknowledged. Anger might be alerting you to a boundary that's been crossed. When you're alone and that uncomfortable feeling rises up, don't run from it. Sit with it. Breathe through it. Ask it what it's trying to tell you. This isn't therapy speak. This is practical intelligence gathering. The more you can tolerate discomfort without immediately reacting, the better your decision-making becomes. You stop making choices from a place of desperation and start making them from a place of information. Practice this daily. Set aside 15 minutes where you sit quietly and just notice what comes up. No music, no podcast, no book. Just you and whatever thoughts or feelings want attention. Don't judge them. Don't try to solve them, just observe them, like you're a scientist studying a specimen. Over time, you'll develop what I call emotional immunity, the ability to feel something without being controlled by it. Second, create systems for decision-making that don't depend on other people's input. Most men make decisions by consensus, even when they don't realize it. They check with their friends, their family, their coworkers, their social media feed. They gather opinions like they're collecting evidence for a case they have to make to themselves. But all those voices create noise that drowns out your own judgment. Instead, develop a framework for making decisions that starts and ends with your own analysis. Write down the key factors. What are the potential outcomes? What are your priorities? What aligns with your values? What serves your long-term goals? Run through scenarios in your head. Consider the advice others might give, but don't let it override your own assessment. Make the call, then commit to it completely. This doesn't mean being stubborn or ignoring valuable input. It means developing confidence in your own thinking process so you can evaluate other perspectives without being overwhelmed by them. You become the final authority on your own life, which is where that authority always belonged anyway. Third, build routines that reinforce your independence rather than your need for stimulation. Most people fill their alone time with inputs, Netflix, social media, podcasts, music, anything to avoid silence. But those inputs are other people's thoughts, other people's agendas, other people's versions of reality flooding your mental space. Instead, use your solitude for outputs. Write in a journal, even if you never read it again. Think through problems without immediately Googling solutions. Plan your week based on your priorities, not your impulses. Physical routines work the same way. Instead of going to crowded gyms where you're performing for others, find ways to challenge yourself privately. Instead of eating out where the social pressure influences your choices, learn to cook meals that satisfy your actual hunger rather than your emotional needs. These aren't antisocial behaviors. They're sovereignty practices. Every time you meet your own needs without external validation or assistance, you prove to yourself that you can be trusted with your own life. Fourth, develop the ability to say no without explanation or apology. This is where most people fail because they think saying no requires justification. They believe they owe other people a detailed explanation for their boundaries, a compelling case for their preferences, an apology for their unavailability. But explanation becomes negotiation, and negotiation becomes manipulation. When someone asks you to do something that doesn't align with your priorities, energy level, or values, no is a complete sentence. Not no because or no but maybe, just no. People will test this. They'll ask why. They'll push back. They'll try to make you feel guilty. Your response? I've already decided. No elaboration, no defense, no room for debate. This isn't about being rude. It's about being clear. Most people respect direct communication more than they respect endless explanations. They might not like your boundary, but they'll understand where they stand with you. And you'll discover something liberating. Most of the things people ask you to do aren't that important to them anyway. They're just testing to see if you'll say yes. Now here's what naturally happens when you start operating from this place of genuine independence. You don't have to try to be mysterious or impressive or intimidating. Those qualities emerge as byproducts of authentic self-possession. First, your standards become non-negotiable because they're not up for discussion. When you know what you want and what you won't accept, you stop wasting time in situations that don't serve you. People notice this immediately. They see someone who doesn't compromise their values for convenience, who doesn't lower their expectations to make others comfortable, who doesn't apologize for having preferences. This kind of clarity is magnetic because it's rare. Second, your emotional stability becomes a source of strength for others, but only when they've earned access to it. People start coming to you for advice, not because you're trying to be wise, but because you've demonstrated the ability to think clearly under pressure. Your opinion carries weight because it's not influenced by mood, peer pressure, or the need to please. You become a reference point for others who are struggling to trust their own judgment. Third, your time and attention become valuable because they're not freely given to anyone who asks. When you're selective about what you engage with, when you do engage, it means something. People pay attention when you speak because you don't waste words on meaningless chatter. Your presence feels intentional rather than accidental. You ever notice how people treat someone differently when they know that person could walk away at any time? When they're not desperate for approval or afraid of being alone? There's a respect that comes from recognizing genuine strength, and that strength can't be faked. It has to be built through the exact process you're going through, learning to be comfortable in your own skin, confident in your own judgment, complete in your own company. So here's where we stand. You can keep trying to fit yourself into a world that was never designed for people who think the way you think, who value what you value, who need the space you need. You can keep explaining yourself to people who will never understand. Keep seeking approval from those who can't recognize authentic strength when they see it. Keep compromising your clarity for the comfort of others. Or you can accept what you already know deep down, that your solitude isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's a foundation to be built upon. The path forward isn't about becoming antisocial or cutting yourself off from meaningful connections. It's about developing the kind of inner strength that makes every connection you do choose more valuable. It's about reaching the point where you engage with others from a place of abundance rather than need, where your relationships are investments rather than dependencies. This isn't an easy path. There will be nights when the silence feels too heavy, when you question whether you're missing something everyone else has figured out. There will be moments when the cost of independence feels higher than the price of belonging. But remember this: every truly strong man in history had to walk through that same valley. Every leader, every innovator, every person who changed the world had to learn to trust their own judgment more than the crowd's consensus. The world needs people who can think independently, who can make decisions based on principle rather than popularity, who can stand alone when standing with the crowd means compromising their integrity. Your solitude isn't preparing you to be alone forever. It's preparing you to be strong enough to choose your connections wisely. What kind of man do you want to be when the noise dies down and the crowds go home? Someone who built his identity on other people's approval, or someone who forged his character in the quiet strength of his own company? Let me know in the comments below. Are you ready to stop apologizing for needing space and start using that space to build something unshakable? If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's more where this came from, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Check out the video that's about to pop up on your screen. Trust me, you'll want to watch it. Until next time, keep building in the shadows. I'll see you in the next video.